Hi, it's Jan Beta, and today's video is not going quite as I intended it to go. I planned to do a video about this 1541 drive, and I wanted to fix it because it came with the C64 that Robert donated. I repaired that in a previous video, and it was quite an effort. So maybe you want to watch that. It's linked in the corner. I kind of assumed that this would have some issues too, because the C64 had some issues. But sadly enough, if that's even a thing, this does fully work. It's brilliant. Even the alignment is 100% accurate and things like that. I checked it. It just works. Yeah, so instead of fixing this 1541 drive, which obviously doesn't need any fixing, I am just going to do a slight modification on it, which is relatively easy to do, but can save you a lot of trouble in the long run. So let's do it. So first of all, this does completely and utterly work. Let me just run the alignment check. And this is a disk I wrote on another disk drive actually. So the alignment check, it doesn't make sense to run the alignment check on the same disk drive you formatted the disk on, because it's going to be aligned to that particular disk drive in any case. I wrote this disk on another disk drive, and I'm just going to show you the alignment check briefly. This is using the 1541 diagnostics from World of Yanni, which is not Yanni like in Jan Beta, but another Jan. And yeah, that's a very, very useful thing to have. I actually have a switchable diagnostics, 1541 diagnostics card, which has the C64 diagnostics and the 1541 diagnostics on one card. Made that myself ages ago, and it still serves me well. Yeah, as you can see, the alignment is really good. Actually, the green numbers are for the track positioning, like the read-write head on the track should be 100, and the red numbers are the positioning between the tracks, so the space between the tracks, and that should be 100 or close to 100 too. There's one on track 22, it says 86, but that's all right. Otherwise, it's spot on. It's aligned very well. So yeah, might be my other drive had an alignment problem there, but otherwise, yeah, it's perfectly aligned. It's pretty silent, and it just works. So yeah, no issues there. I just wanted to show you that this drive is fully functional and working very well, exceptionally well, actually. Let me take a second to thank the sponsor for this video, PCBWay, my favorite manufacturer of prototype PCBs. And they have a special contest going on. Not your usual PCB design contest, but a contest about making a tutorial about how to design PCBs. So you can submit your videos or blog posts to the website I'm going to link in the video description, and you can win a bunch of prizes. And of course, there's never enough tutorials for designing PCBs, so check out the link in the description and maybe participate in the contest. Back to the 1541. Yeah, so this is a 1541C, as it is called. These were meant to be used with the newly designed Commodore 64C, the flat design. It's kind of a hybrid of the original 1541s and the 1541-2, which was the smaller drive with the external power supply that came later. And yeah, there are several different versions of these. This is a model that has the Neutronics or Mitsumi mechanism in it. The actual disk drive was made by Mitsumi, so this is a Neutronics mechanism. You can see that by this little lever here. And the other ones have the spring-loaded mechanism in the center here. That mechanism was produced by Alps. And the initial versions of these had that Alps mechanism, which is the same. I think they even just repainted the front part of the drive. They were just regular 1541 drives with a repainted disk drive mechanism and a brighter colored case. The original ones had like the C64 color, which still I don't really know what to call that color. The case was the same color for the C64 and the 1541s, and these ones are the same color case-wise as the C64C, so it's a brighter case. And yeah, these of course have a huge built-in power supply. There's a huge transformer on the bottom here, and there's linear regulators for the 5 volts and the 12 volts rails that this uses. There's a little sticker on here that says Robert, because Robert donated this. Thank you, Robert. Just so I remember who donated this. These are not very well regarded by many people in this scene because Commodore slightly changed the ROMs in these because they implemented a track 0 sensor actually, which the older versions didn't have. So it reads the sensor sometimes. That also leads to these not making that blender sound that the 1541s, the original ones, got so famous for. Some of these do, because some of these are the same as the original 1541s. This one doesn't. This one is quite silent because it just has a light sensor for the track 0 position. But that leads to some fast loaders and such not being quite compatible. I have used this for a while now and I didn't run into any issues, so I don't really know how much truth there is to that. But yeah, we are going to find out because I'm going to use this more frequently in the future after I modded this. And the mod actually has to do with this sticker here. Let's zoom in. Yeah, and as you can see, this is a single drive floppy disk model 1541. On some of those it says 1541C, so I'm not sure what I'm going to find in this. Maybe this is just a 1541 that has the added sensor or something. I don't really know. It doesn't do the rattling, so the track 0 position rattling that the old ones do, so I suppose there's a newer board revision in here. This is the line I'm particularly interested in. This is a European version of this, and obviously this was made for the German market. It has the old German voltage of 220 volts AC. So that was the mains voltage in Germany until about 1987 or so. In 1983, most European countries decided to unify the mains voltages to 230 volts, and that's what we have here now. The transition to 230 volts actually started in 1987, and by the early 90s, every household in Germany had 230 volts, I think. These have like a 10% tolerance for that voltage, so they ran fine on the 230 volts grid, but there's like a transformer in here and there are linear voltage regulators, so there's a lot of power that's actually dissipated into heat when you run this on a 230 volts supply. There is a transformer in here that can be wired both to 220 volts and 240 volts, which was the voltage for the UK. I think it still is actually in some parts, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not quite sure about that. So these could be wired to 240 or 220 volts, depending on where they were meant to be sold. This one is wired for 220 volts, I suppose, and you can rewire these for 240 volts, which actually makes this run a lot cooler. If you have ever used one of these, probably you know that these run pretty hot, even if they are wired up for the correct voltage. So it definitely doesn't hurt to make these run cooler for a bit. They are still going to work fine with 220 volts wiring and 230 volts actually going in them, but they are going to run cooler with the 240 volts wiring. So that's the plan for today. Let's open it up and have a look at how this can be achieved. We have to turn this over, and there are 4 screws that I need to remove. So now the top part should just lift up. Yay! This is what this looks like from the inside. As you can see, it says Mitsumi Electric Company Limited here, Neutronics Company Limited. So yeah, I think Neutronics is just a subsidiary of Mitsumi. So this is a Neutronics Mitsumi drive. And underneath here is the transformer. This is the main board. So actually just realized that this has an Eprom in here where the ROM should be. The early models of these have two separate ROMs still, a smaller ROM size. This has one ROM just like the 1541-2. So this is a larger ROM, not quite sure about the capacity off the top of my head. This also had one 6522 replaced in here. Okay, there are two of these. These are I/O chips basically. So one of them, these are very common faults. One of them seems to have been replaced previously, which is kind of nice. This has been worked on, so as many of these have. Yeah, other than that, we have the two voltage regulators, 7812 and 7805. These are basically linear voltage regulators for 5 volts and 12 volts. And these run really warm. That's why they are mounted on this massive heatsink. So some of the heat can dissipate. The transformer is actually underneath the board, so we are going to take this out for this mod and work on the transformer itself. These shorter boards have a lot of the glue logic that is discrete 74 logic on the older versions of this, incorporated into this hybrid chip, I think that's what they're called. Just a huge multi-pin, I'm not even going to count them, chip here that's standing upright. I think I have to remove this, which should be the connector for the head. Yeah, I'm going to remove this. And I think I just want to remove the screws from this. Also, I'm going to remove this, which should be the power supply thing. There are two bridge rectifiers here for both of the transformer windings that supply both of these linear regulators. So yeah, there's no tantalum capacitors on here. These were quite commonly failing on the old boards, and tantalum capacitors have the tendency to burst into flames and short out if they fail. So quite good that there aren't any tantalums on here. I'm just going to remove these screws here, and hopefully we are going to be able to access the transformer underneath. Oh, and there are two screws for the heatsink here, so that the whole metal frame acts as a heatsink. And then, yeah, then the whole board could possibly just lift out like so. Does it though? Is there? Oh, there's another screw. There we go. Okay, there's our transformer. So on this particular drive, on some of them you can just access the contacts on the transformer. They are on the top here. On this one, they are on the bottom, but I don't think I have to take out this whole thing, because look at this. There's a little wire that is just heat shrunk and bent over, I think. Yeah, it's bent in there. And I think this is the winding for the 240 volts that is just supposed to go on here, I think. So we have the ground, we have the live wire that goes through this power switch here. And I think, yeah, that also goes through the fuse and then goes to this red wire. And I think what we are supposed to, yeah, this one goes to the transformer. And this is the one actually wired to, this is the power input socket here, the IEC socket. This actually has 3 IEC sockets because the Commodore serial bus sockets are also called IEC. The 3-prong power socket is also called IEC because it's an international standard thing. So I'm just going to clip this zip tie and see what we have. So, okay, so this is a loose wire here. I'm just going to have to remove this heat shrink here. And I'm going to add new heat shrink later. Yeah, and this was just coiled up in there and heat shrunk nicely so it doesn't make contact with anything. Let me remove this white wire from the IEC socket. There's heat shrink tubing over this contact here as well, so we're just going to have to remove that. I'm just stripping both of these wires to double check. There we go. So to double check, I'm just going to get out my multimeter here and measure the resistance. I mixed up the wires. This is the one that was heat shrunk and just coiled up. And the winding between this and this pin on the IEC connector with the power switch turned on is the 220 volts winding. That's approximately 40 ohms, and the other winding should be in a bit more. This and this is basically a short. That's not the one we want to replace this with. We want this red one here. So we are going to replace this one here. The white one should go back. So we want to replace this side, which is this red wire coming out here. So this should be closer to 44. It should be a bit higher than the 220 volts winding. So this just stays in place. We are going to solder this back onto here, and we are going to replace the red wire here. This is 44, yeah. Between these two, it's 44. And between this and this, it's 42. 40, thereabouts. That's the 220. So, okay, between the white and this black one, it's around 40. And between white and this black one, it's around 44. So that's our 240 volts winding on the transformer. So, yeah, I replaced the wrong one. So this should be soldered onto this red one here. And this white one should go back on here. It's not going to massively improve the heat performance, the thermal performance, but it's around as much excess heat as the difference between the voltages, so it's a 4% difference or something like that. So, and that actually directly affects the voltage regulators. So that's where most of the heat is generated in these. Of course, you could just put a modern switching power supply into these, as Adrian Black, I think, did that. And that's not a difficult mod. You basically just bypass the whole transformer and the voltage regulation and connect the outputs from the switching power supply that you can find switching power supplies that have 5 volts and 12 volts from everywhere. Basically, they are basically the standard power supplies for like external hard disk drives and things like that. So you can just put one of those in there and totally get rid of the transformer actually. So yeah, that's another way to do it. Probably more elegant. But I kind of like to keep it as original as possible. So I'm going with this mod. We're basically modding this to the UK configuration now. The ones sold in the UK came with that configuration from factory. And we're going to solder this back onto here. And the black one goes where the red one was. I'm putting heat shrink tubing back on, so yeah, just for good measure. And the red wire we're just going to cut and basically do the same as was done with the black wire previously. So we're going to put a piece of heat shrink on there. Okay, that should be it. So, and to double check this, I'm just going to hook this up to the mains and stay away from the circuit board, but measure the output of the transformer. Yeah, let's turn this on to AC voltage. And let's see what we have. Oh, that's our windings. The two blue wires are 9 volts. That's probably for the 5 volts regulator. And we have 15 volts on the two orange wires on this connector. That's our other winding, for the 12 volts. So yeah, that seems to be okay. And I'm going to put some new cable ties on there. I'm also going to note the rewiring on the transformer here so I don't accidentally rewire it. I'm just going to cable tie this to the case. So that shouldn't go anywhere. So now to put the circuit board back in. And of course it would be a good idea to replace the electrolytic capacitors because according to the date codes on the chips, this was made in 1986. And this had pin 1 on the red wire. So it goes on here like this. And it's also coded in that it has one pin is missing here and one pin is missing on the connector too. So this should probably now still work, hopefully. And run a bit cooler. Moment of truth! Let's power this on and see if it pops. No, it doesn't. Just spins up. That's how it's supposed to be, I guess. Yeah, let's hook it up to the C64 and see if it still works. So it should reset with the C64. Which it does. And I'm just going to run some tests here. This disk, I ran the tests before. Performance test, let's see. And this should format the disk and try to read and write files and things like that. Yeah, so the mechanical test just passed with flying colors. So now it's writing a file. This is basically the same performance test that's on the 1541 demo disk. There are some really useful things on there. But I'm running this from the test cartridge, as I mentioned. So yeah, it passed, yay! And as the voltages are generated by the linear voltage regulators, I'm not too worried about this. Should work the same as before because the voltages that go to the board and to the motor and such are exactly the same. It's just that the transformer is wired up a bit differently, so the voltages going to the linear regulators are a bit lower. Slightly misaligned between track 22 and 23, somewhere around that, but that's okay. It's 99%. It seems to still work fine. I'm just going to let this run for a while and see if it gets any warm. Yeah, so I played some games and ran this for a while, which of course is my favorite part for all these repairs and mods. And yeah, it doesn't get as warm as it used to, at least as my original 1541 used to. I remember using it as quite a nice hand warmer in winter originally. This one, you can actually, you can still feel it gets warm, but not nearly as much as it used to get warm. So yeah, quite satisfied with how this came out. One last thing I want to do is to get into this again and clean the head, the read-write head, and lubricate it a bit. It's slightly noisy when it spins, so yeah, we're going to see about that. And cleaning the head isn't a bad idea once you have these open anyway. So yeah, let's do that. And the read-write head is located under this plastic thingy here. We can lubricate this a bit because it spins. This top part is just pushing down on the head, and if you insert a disc, it's actually read and written to from the bottom. So the read-write head is in there. So I'm just going to soak a Q-tip in alcohol, IPA, 99.9%, and I'm just going to put it in there. You don't want to lift up this top part too much because it's spring-loaded basically, and you wear out the spring when you do that. So the pressure it puts on the disc is not going to be enough in the worst case anymore. I'm usually letting this soak for a while, so but this looks relatively clean. And just very carefully, because I don't want to mislay. Yeah, this is absolutely clean. Usually I go on there with some IPA and then just polish it with a clean side here. But that's clean. That's nothing to worry about. And there are actually rails this head travels on. I'm just going to use another Q-tip and some silicone grease to lubricate those. So just some silicone grease here. You want to make sure these rails are relatively clean beforehand. And I'm also going to put a drop here. You don't want this to seep underneath there into the mechanism. That's about all I want to do to this at this point. Would be a good idea to replace the capacitors, of course, but I'm not going to do that today. I'm just going to go in there with some compressed air as well. To get rid of any dust that's still in there. There's some pieces of styrofoam because this came packed in styrofoam. So here's another thing that I noticed while working on this. There's actually a little cutout in the case here. I don't know if you can see it very well on camera. This little piece here was removed, and together with one of the 6522 chips being socketed, I kind of suspect that this had a parallel interface in there. So some of the fast loaders, the really fast ones, used parallel interfaces, which would also explain why the ROM is socketed and why the 6522 is socketed, because you would put a custom ROM in here and you would also put a socket with a cable connected to it underneath one of the 6522 ones. I have Dolphin DOS, which is a parallel fast loader, in my original 1541 that I made a video about ages ago, actually. That actually has a little circuit board sitting in the socket for the 6522. And the 6522 that is in the socket in this one actually has the exact same date code, 39th week of 86, that the one that is still soldered to the board in here has. So probably this wasn't repaired. This had a fast loader installed, so the parallel interface, probably some small circuit board went into this socket, and the 6522 went on top, and another bit of logic went in there as well. So it could have a parallel interface, and somebody replaced the Eprom that was the fast loader Eprom probably with the original ROM. So this is going to be the original 1541 ROM. It's, yeah, as it said, so nothing fancy in here, I guess. I'm just going to read the status of the drive, and after you turn this on, this should contain the version of the ROM actually. And as you can see, it says CBM-DOS version 2.6 1541, which is the regular 1541 ROM. We're going to check that in my Eprom programmer, I guess. So I put the Eprom into my MiniPro Eprom programmer. And let's see what it is. Let's read it. So we're in Windows XP in VirtualBox, which I actually use for this stuff. And I have selected the correct chip, which is Thomson or SGS M27128A. And we have our ROM here, which seems to be the stock 1541 ROM. Okay, so there actually is the FC command, which we can run in binary mode, and we should be able to compare our file. This is our file. So I compared this ROM with all the ROMs I could find online on zimmers.net, and it doesn't seem to quite match any of the ROMs. It's quite similar to the 1541-2 ROM, but it's not quite that. So yeah, I maybe this is some custom version, but it seems to work fine, so no issues there. I am going to upload the file somewhere, so maybe somebody has more luck with comparing that. In theory, you can use the file compare command in Windows to compare the binary files, and yeah, it seems to be slightly different. So probably this doesn't do the rattling thing because it seems to utilize the track 0 sensor correctly, which not all of these do. Actually, the older versions do a rattle every time you turn them on. So yeah, not quite sure about that. On some of the boards you have to cut a jumper, so it actually uses the track 0 sensor, but this doesn't even seem to have that jumper. It's supposedly jumper 3 that needs to be cut. I can't see any jumper 3, so this is probably the modern version of this, which doesn't have the jumper and has the sensor already activated. And probably that's why the firmware doesn't match anything I've found on Zimmers. That's probably the newer firmware. I'm not sure. It does work. The firmware it doesn't seem to be any kind of fast loader or something like that. It's just very similar to the 1541-2. Maybe this is a custom version from some time. I don't know. It just says regular ROM, so I'm just going to suppose it is the regular ROM for this drive, just on an Eprom. So yeah, that's about all I want to do with this drive, I guess. I am going to go in here at some point and replace the capacitors, and also probably there's going to be a refurb episode about this drive because it is quite yellowed and doesn't look really great. Doesn't look bad. It's not that dirty or anything. So yeah. For now I'm just going to close this because this video was mostly about the transformer mod. If you have any ideas about the ROM, let me know. I'm going to put a link to it in the video description, I guess. Yeah, that's it for this video. There's obviously more things you can do to your 1541 disk drive. I just wanted to show this particular mod in this video because I haven't seen many videos about this particular mod. Of course, it applies to drives that have a transformer with multiple windings for multiple different input voltages. It probably doesn't apply to the American drives and things like that. This definitely applies to the European or German/UK versions of these drives, as you've seen. And also for the older models where the transformer looks a tiny bit different, but the process is the same basically. So yeah, you obviously shouldn't do this mod at all if you're not comfortable working around mains voltages, which this is. Always have your devices unplugged while working on them, and be aware that you may trash your device with a mod like this if you accidentally get it wrong. So yeah, I'm not a professional, just wanted to point that out. Remember to subscribe to the bell and ring the thumbs up button or things like that. I don't really know how that works. Thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon and on the channel memberships page. Thank you. I'm Jan Beta, thanks for watching, see you next time, bye!